Welcome, everyone. Welcome, amigos. Welcome, curious people. I'm your local anthropologist, archaeologist here, and we usually talk about different topics regarding culture. And most of the time, we end up talking about movies, since movies is an interesting way of talking about culture. And today is actually going to be a special video for me. Today, we're actually going to talk about Lucha Libre. So you might be wondering, why in the heck are you talking about Lucha Libre? Well, it doesn't hurt that I'm Mexican and Lucha Libre is huge in Mexico, but I would argue that it's huge in countries all over the world, all over like Latin America, Abiyala, as well as Japan, the US, you name it. Lucha Libre culture is everywhere. I would argue it's even influenced superhero culture and the whole mask culture that we see in comics today. And the other thing that's like super fascinating about Lucha Libre is that it permeated not only just like the sport art or the sport culture world of Mexico, it also even made a big impact in cinema. And arguably, it's one of the things that you probably think about when you think of Mexico. Even if you've never seen Lucha Libre, you've probably seen like these masks, right? These Lucha Libre masks, or maybe you've seen like a design in the store that has some kind of like Lucha Libre mask when you're going to the store. And maybe you're looking at party supplies and you're looking for something that's like Mexican design. You'll see little like Lucha Libre mask as like a decorative little centerpiece, or maybe for some kind of artistic background. Lucha Libre is Mexico and it's very connected to its arts. And so that's why I want to talk about it. First, I'm going to do a breakdown about the roots of Lucha Libre. The second section, we're talking about the masks, because it's integral. It's arguably what defines Lucha Libre compared to like any of the other forms of catch wrestling, pro wrestling today, and whatnot. And I'm gonna do a little quick note on Lucha Libre cinema, just briefly, and like the Lucha Libre influence in the outside world. Then I'm gonna do a quick note on different female pioneers, and last, I'm just gonna talk about culture and politics. All right, guys. So let's get into it. So the history of Lucha Libre, or the roots of it. Since history is kind of a big term, so we'll just say we're talking about the roots of it. France had control of Mexico in the late 1800s, and during this time period in the Conquista that was taking over Mexico with Maximilian, in this time period there was also interchanging of cultures that was happening too. And one of the most prolific things that were brought was French wrestling, Belgian wrestling. It was essentially a form of like folk style wrestling. And it was very fascinating because catch wrestling was also prominent at the same time. So it's kind of like a contemporary at that time. If you guys don't know what catch wrestling is arguably like what the roots are of modern day pro wrestling. But before maxes were fixed and predetermined, there was more of a sport element to wrestling that's known as catch wrestling. Catch wrestling was grappling art that's essentially combined of pins and different cranks, which are kind of like submission holds. But most of the time there you can like, pull somebody's face and kind of crank it in a various direction. Depending on certain rule sets, you can allow like different submissions of like arms and legs, but your back can't touch the mat, because if your back touches the mat, that's considered a pin. So you can like subdue and make your opponent submit as long as your back doesn't touch the mat. So it creates like a very dynamic match. So what made the matches very dynamic was the fact that a person applying a pin their back couldn't be on the ground if they were applying some kind of wrestling hold or a pin. If they were pinning someone, you had to make sure that their back was elevated towards the sky, because pretend this is someone's back. You're holding somebody down, 1, 2, 3, you win. But let's say you're on your back and you have them in a choke. If they push your back to the ground, this person is technically pinning you, even though they're kind of not. It doesn't look like they are, but your back is on the ground, so that's considered a pin, and the other person just won. So kind of makes the match more dynamic. And these matches captured a lot of Mexican compatriots' attention, and it grew. And it's one of those things that just exploded, and it's been there ever since, and exploded in every category. But mostly it was the poorer working class that were attracted to it because they saw it as an opportunity, as a sport, and as a way out to kind of move and elevate themselves into their social classes. It's very fascinating how it just kind of just blew up like wildfire. And the thing that was very interesting is that as it grew in popularity in Mexico, it just formed and developed its own style. And what's one of those things that made the style so enigmatic and so popular? It's the mask. So for this section, I'm gonna put the mask on. It just seems like it makes the most sense. Probably gonna mess up my hair a bit, but it's okay. We're gonna wear the mask. So these masks were very integral because it's what essentially made you stand out, right? We have all kinds of different legendary luchadores. I'm wearing the mask of Blue Demon, which is just Blue Demon, kind of said in like a Spanish accent. We have him right here in this corner facing El Santo, arguably the most popular Lucha Libre athlete of all time. And right here we got Huracan Ramirez, and we have a little Brian Ortega figurine right here that's also wearing a little Huracan Ramirez mask. Another very popular. You also have like Mil Máscaras, Los Caras, Ray Wagner. You have Silver King. You have modern wrestlers today like Octagon Jr., Pentagon, Máscara Sagrada. You have Phoenix. You have all kinds of luchadores. As far as the first match where someone had a mask on, we really don't know where it started. There was definitely matches that were recorded in France where people were kind of wearing like a very non-traditional mask, kind of like a sack or some kind of like simple mask. One of the earliest like depictions of we have someone in the mask would be like El Enmascarado, which means the masked one. It's one of the first and earlier depictions of it. And El Santo would be one of the most popular renditions of it as well. And it's interesting because he had like other masks and other variants, but El Santo was his most like popular and most well-known personification. We even have like generationals. We have like an Hijo del Santo and stuff as well too. And that's its own tangent, so I won't go into Santo. Santo's like its own phenomenon. It was just like a craze. He was like basically like the Hulk Hogan, the Rowdy Piper of Mexico, but in an earlier time period, not in the 80s. We're talking like 50s, 60s, 70s. He was just huge. He was everything. He was everywhere. He was even like a sex symbol too. It also helps that, most of these men are kind of shirtless, sometimes in like boxers or tights, kind of showing off their physique. So it's very easy for them to be some sex symbols, even though you can't see their face, right? There's like a mysteriousness to it as well. So there's that element. And what's really fascinating about Lucha Libre masks is that these intricate masks actually have origins with shoemakers, zapateros, which we call in Spanish. They're the ones that like created all these intricate little stitchings that had all these like different designs going on it to make these like masks pretty, because they're pretty strong. Like it's, you know what I mean? And you'll see it in matches, like they'll try to pull them apart. You'll have like hair versus mask matches. If you lose, you have to shave your head bald. If you lose, you take off your mask, which became very popular in Lucha Libre, the whole like mask tearing thing. And that's another cool thing about the mask, other than the intricacy and the artisan and the creativity and the expressiveness and artistic designs that were done because of the shoemakers. There's also this level of like mystery that captured the person's audience, and that's the power of the mask. That's the power of Lucha Libre, that the mask in a way allows the audience member to become the Lucha Libre fighter. You put on this mask, you buy this mask, you support them, and now you're like collaborating. It becomes this collaborative experience, this almost like religious experience with the audience, and you're like fighting with whatever luchador that you're super into, and you're like sharing this experience because Lucha Libre has this experience that like you're the every person, you're the voice of the people, you're like representing it. Because one of the most interesting, compelling thing about Lucha Libre is that like you don't know what's gonna happen. Lucha Libre isn't like other combat sports. It's not like kickboxing, it's not like boxing, it's not like it's MMA, it's not like sumo. There's no like expected outcome. You don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know if someone's gonna submit somebody, you don't know if someone's gonna do a crazy backflip, you don't know who's gonna win. Sure, the wrestlers know who they're going to win because most of the time it's predetermined, but sometimes matches are determined in the match itself. What does that mean? So, as the wrestlers are performing, there'll be certain moments, and depending on the people's reaction, whoever gets strongest pop, even if it's good or loud, sometimes that'll determine who wins. Or if someone does like a very important signature move, not their finishing move, but like a signature move, and they do it more gracefully, more elegantly, sometimes that's who determine who wins the fight. Either the person that does it first or the one that does it more creatively. So little things like that, even during the match, kind of create this additional performative element. And it's cool and it's compelling. Much of the older like wrestling styles, when you're looking at different like luchadors and masked luchadors, like the older style, we're talking like 30s, 40s, 50s, 50s, 60s, kind of that heyday, 70s, because there was a band in the 50s. But those styles of wrestlers, the way they wrestled, was kind of more traditional, more catch wrestling. You see a lot more like, slam, submission holds. It wasn't until the 80s you start seeing more of the high flyers, people trying to really use the turnbuckles, which are the ropes around the boxing ring. And once you see that element of it, so it starts kind of elevating, and then you start kind of Lucha Libre just continuing to expand and grow and to have its own identity. So now that we're done talking about the power of masks, we're going to talk about masks a little bit in the next section because it's important, but we're going to do our emphasis on Lucha Libre cinema. So the mask comes off for this section. So Lucha Libre cinema. Hopefully the hair isn't too crazy. And if it is, well, you know why, dude. I put on a mask, so my hair is going to be a little... Who likes the funk? We like the funk. Who likes the funk? We like the funk. Lucha Libre cinema. It's really interesting. It's really compelling. The biggest heyday of Lucha Libre cinema, it goes around from like the 1950s. It ends in the 1970s. And a lot of those films were directed by Federico Curiel. And it's really cool. Huracán Ramirez was one of the films that was directed in 1953. Mil Máscaras was directed in 1959. Blue Demon contra los Diabólicos was directed in 1968. Profanadores de Tumba or del Santos, directed in 1966. Los Canallas, which featured Mil Máscaras, directed in 1968. Santo y el Blue Demon contra los Monstruos, directed in 1970. Las Momias de Guanajuato, 1972, which was Santo's most successful film, and it featured three of the big Lucha Libre juggernauts of the 70s, which was El Santo, Blue Demon, and Mil Máscaras. Blue Demon is very interesting because he was like a villain that became kind of an anti-hero and then became a hero, and it's the mask I'm wearing. He's one of my favorites. The reason why I like Blue Demon so much because like he actually had a Greco-Roman background. He actually trained a little judo, a little aikido, so he put a little bit of his actual martial arts background with his style. And I'm a sucker for martial arts style. Going back to Lucha Libre cinema. Lucha Libre cinema blew up, and just like the power of film, it allowed Mexico to form its own superhero culture, its own dynamic culture, and it captured the world's imagination. This made Lucha Libre blow up all over the world, and it expanded to the image that we understand today. And I would argue that Lucha Libre is one of the most strongest elements that allowed the whole idea of a Caped Crusader and someone being masked, and it captures the person's imagination because it became this like mystery, and I think everyone likes a good mystery, and it's very compelling once you start seeing it because Lucha Libre started appealing interest all over the world, and Lucha Libre like would often challenge. You would have a lot of like Americans or people from Europe, Japan that would either go to Mexico, or people from Lucha Libre would travel to other countries to defend their titles, and it would also help create and expand the Lucha Libre landscape all over the world. And then that's where you see it growing along with cinema. So you just have this phenomenon growing all over the place, and it seeped into a lot of superhero culture. And you would even see him in some local shows that you wouldn't even sometimes even see like some like Lucha Libre people like imitate like famous superheroes, even though they weren't supposed to because that's kind of copyright infringement. But, back then the world wasn't as connected to the internet, so you couldn't really find somebody for that element, right? You wouldn't really know. Not everybody had a smartphone, and not everybody had a camera on them, so they couldn't like snitch on you and say like, hey, you can't film about that. You don't have the rights to it. Who would know? It's like some random place in Mexico, this little rancho with like hardly anybody there. How would you know that they're even competing? How do you know this fake Spider-Man isn't facing Batman in the Marvel versus DC? You would never know because it's like in a random place, and we're talking about the 70s or 60s and whatnot. So yeah, Lucha Libre cinema is amazing. I'm going to eventually do a topic just on that because it's just like really fascinating, because Lucha Libre cinema, yes, it's action, but it also flirts with horror because most of the time it's like these Lucha Libre characters facing these fantastical monsters, demons, and spirits. So there's also this idea, like I'm telling you earlier, it's like the Mexican superhero, this idea that, yeah, not only Lucha Libre people are like amazing in the ring, they can also like exceed and do these superpowered things. And it's beautiful because it kind of allows you to expand the whole Mexican imagination, the possibility, the human belief system. And it kind of allows you to like expand the human possibilities. And it's interesting how there was like that connection to horror and mask. But I think the mask element also creates this natural horror thing to it. And the other thing that's really compelling about Lucha Libre films is that they kind of have this like sexploitation, this whole like Pulp Fiction kind of attitude towards it. Because it's like, there's like this forbiddenness with masks. There's kind of almost like this dominatrix, gimp, dog fetish kind of thing going on at the same time. I'm not saying it's exactly connected, but there's like some sexual elements to it. There's like a mysteriousness to it. And it's interesting because it's also during that same time of like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and civil rights movement in Mexico, trying to transition to modernization, but also battling with trying to be conservative. And all these things are happening at the same time. And what's really crazy is that when Lucha Libre cinema was booming in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was actually a ban of Lucha Libre in the 1950s. In the Mexico City, in the state of Mexico, like centered in the capital, Lucha Libre was banned. Mexico City was starting to become more commercially viable. A lot of important films were starting to film there in Mexico City, and Mexico City wanted to become like was growing in population. It was trying to become like a big world city, and it wanted to have a more proper look. And it felt like Lucha Libre was kind of a stain to it. They wanted to revamp their image. They banned Lucha Libre in Mexico. So while it was banned, you also have like movies that were being made. So it kind of like counteracted this. So it kind of became like this secret thing. We often know that there's like a secrecy and shame associated with sex. And while that's happening, you also have the US and Hollywood making some influence because you have like the civil rights movement. You have like the end of World War II happening in the 50s. And you have this like sexual liberation because the 50s was a very conservative time, but we already know at the end of the 50s, the world was like kind of sick of being conservative, and it just became super sexual in the 60s because it's like, come on, let's have fun. You know, we had all this war, we had all this, stop being uptight, let's just party and enjoy life. So you see that transition in cinema, and Lucha Libre is actually one of the most interesting and compelling ways to see it as well. So yeah. That's the end of my section talking about Lucha Libre cinema. The next section, we're talking about some female pioneers. Lucha Libre arguably started, like I stated, through the French roots in the late 1800s, like 1860s, 1890s. 1860s, 1890s, that's like kind of around like where it started. It didn't get bigger until the 1930s. So that's all that blew up. And at that same time, in the 1930s and 1950s, that's where female Lucha Libre was also starting. In the 1930s, you had like different women that were trying to wrestle, but it was also hard for them to find other women willing to wrestle. Sometimes you would have like very strong women that would kind of come up on the scene, but they wouldn't have women that were want to compete with them. They were intimidated, or also circumstances and money, because although Lucha Libre was growing in popularity, it wasn't always a viable career move. It was a lot of sacrifice, and it wasn't until you really became famous that you made any kind of money through its publicity and whatnot. Irma Gonzalez, one of the more important legends. They call her the Madre de todas las reinas, the mother of all the queens. She's very compelling. Chavela Romera, also very important in the 50s and 60s. And they often traded the titles. And yeah, Chavela Romero and Irma Gonzalez often credit like their fellow Mexican fans that helped them like blow up because like they were just very great at what they did and they kept them alive. And just like I said earlier, in the 1950s, there was a ban, but these women still thrived during that ban. They were still allowed to be successful in that ban. And they're some of the most important female wrestlers of that time. But going back to the 1930s where things were starting, promoters are trying to look for different fights. As I stated earlier, one of the examples is Natalia Vasquez did not have an opponent to compete against. So around that time in the 30s, we have different agencies that were trying to form to create a place for notable women wrestlers to travel and compete in Mexico or throughout the world. One of the more notable people that did that was Billy Wolf from America. And he had famous female pioneers in wrestling in general that competed in Mexico, such as Betty Garvey, Mae Young, and Susan Paul. And yeah, as I stated earlier, it was pretty crazy that women were still able to get gigs in the 1950s, even though there was a ban by the city mayor of Ernesto Uchurtu. Because like I stated earlier, he thought like Lucha Libre was immoral. La Dama Mascarada, she was one of the first masked female wrestlers. And there was also female wrestlers featured in Lucha Libre cinema, like Las Luchadoras contra el Médico Asesino, which is like the wrestlers versus the medical assassin or the doctor assassin or the assassin doctor or the killer doctor, however you want to translate it. And the female wrestlers that were featured in that film were Marta La Güera Solis. La Güera just means the blonde. Magdalena Caballero, Toña La Tapatía, Irma Gonzalez, one of the legends I mentioned earlier, and Chavela Romero, her contemporary and her rival. And the other thing that's really interesting that applies to male and female is that there's also generational legacies. You'll often see like daughters or even daughters of famous male wrestlers, female wrestlers that create these like dynasties that help spread the Lucha Libre love and adoration and sport throughout the world. Other famous Lucha Libre stars in the more contemporary, modern era of the late 90s, early 2000s, or even famous wrestlers as today. We have Fabi Apache, Lady Apache, Sexy Star, Dark Angel, Amapola, Marta Villalobos. The last section is just going to be culture and politics. I've kind of alluded to it earlier. Let me break down this section. So in the state discourse, there was a lot of sense for like the underprivileged. Lucha Libre also does a lot of compelling things related to like the working class, gender roles, and religion. And there was a growing presence of working class in the cities, and the working class were viewed differently from the middle and the upper classes. And in the 1950s, there was a term pelado that was a substitute from the word naco, because naco was also someone of like privilege that had money and stuff. But in the 1950s, the word naco eventually evolved to the word vulgar. And while pelado was seen as like lesser, naco was much worse. So it's kind of interesting. It was okay to be working class and be like this sweaty, hardworking wrestler. There was a value to it. There was an honor to it. While naco being someone of like high esteem and kind of like, I don't know, like a snooty person. There was like this transition to it. Why? Because you see this attempt to grow the middle class. It's like this chaotic idea of the modern world and everything happening at the same time. And that's the most beautiful and compelling thing about Lucha Libre, that it's not just about Lucha Libre. You see that compelled through the story as you see like underdogs winning, you see the impossible happens, and you see this beautiful representation of different types of people, and you even see like masculinity tested in different kinds of ways. You have athletes like Pimpinela Escarlata having like diverse sexuality and whatnot, and like luchadors that weren't also just from Mexico, someone for San Juan, Puerto Rico. And so you see like all this diversity, and like you have people that were non-gender binary, LGBTQ, men that were clearly either flamboyant or maybe trans or homosexual, and it was fine. And it wasn't seen as like like ill or gross, because like Lucha Libre became this home for the forgotten, for the unnaturals, for the punks, for the rebels, for the forgotten, for the working class. Because it became this home where you could be anything. And it's kind of like the power of the mask. It's the power of the Lucha Libre. It's the power of the theatrical elements that's there. It kind of gives people like a blank canvas where you can kind of be anybody. And as long as you're entertaining and you're a good Lucha Libre fighter, the audience can adore you. Another thing too that's cool about Lucha Libre, about the whole questioning of like sexuality, having non-traditional wrestlers, female wrestlers, non-gender binary, homosexual wrestlers, trans wrestlers. They also had small people. They had people that were, small, under 3 feet, sometimes 2 feet, and they would even have cool tag team matches with their mini counterparts. You had famous examples like Máscara Sagrada and Mascarita Sagrada, Alebrije and Quije, and you even had mini wrestlers, sometimes known as minis, that were also partaking in the fun. So it also became this fun experience. And also kids tend to like the mini wrestlers the most because sometimes they think that they're kids when they're not. They're just little people or smaller people that are also included in Lucha Libre. I hope you got some value from this. I was excited to talk about Lucha Libre. Are you guys a fan of Lucha Libre? Or are you just curious? Thanks for clicking this video either way. I appreciate your support. If there's any topics you want me to do, please let me know. Thank you for your support. Let's grow this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks for checking out this breakdown from A to Z. Thanks for hanging out with me.